So a lot of the dungeons that we'll be doing in this tier tend to be too easy. This can be due to any number of factors, from enemies dying too quickly to their damage being too low, or the mechanics being non-existent or just boring. However, it takes something special to be shoved into the hellscape that is F tier. The key requirement to land here is that all F tier dungeons have to be annoying in some way. Pharos Sirius is a great example of a dungeon that's hard as hell, but in a way that's annoying, not challenging. A lot of the F tier dungeons are like driving a toddler's plastic car that goes as fast as they can pedal. Continuing the simile, Pharos Sirius is like driving a high-powered sports vehicle with no brakes, a brick tied to the gas pedal, a constant stream of nitro being pumped into the engine, and a pair of DK bongos in place of the wheel. Then, near the end, it turns back into that little plastic car for a second before turning into a moderately sized golf cart for the final boss. To go into the history of this dungeon, Pharos Sirius launched in the 2.1 content patch alongside Copperbell Hard and Hawkway Manor Hard. One of these will be making an appearance in this tier, so have fun trying to figure out which one. Due to 2.1 being the first patch after the game launch, there was a lot of other stuff added. This includes, but isn't limited to, the first Alliance raid, Labyrinth of the Ancients, extreme tier difficulties for the main 3 primals, an extreme fight against the final boss of the base Realm Reborn story, PvP, Beast Tribe quests, player housing, and a boss fight with completely original music that absolutely doesn't sound like a beloved theme from an incredibly popular Disney movie. I think it's safe to say that there was a lot going on at the time. So it makes sense that this dungeon might not have received as much attention as it might have deserved, because this dungeon has a difficulty curve that looks like the most basic roller coaster ever designed. Presentation-wise, Pharos Sirius is miles above anything else in this tier. As you adventure through Noscea, you're frequently given a glimpse of a tall building with a giant crystal growing out of it. Unless you're crazy and go around doing every single side quest in the game, you won't realize that it's actually a lighthouse that once served to guide ships to Limsa Lominsa. Then the Calamity hit, and a big-ass chunk of corrupted crystal smashed right into it. This, along with all the other shit going on during the Calamity, meant that the Maelstrom had no choice but to abandon it. Sometime later, a siren that has clearly run the near content because goddamn began making her home there, using the old tower that would guide people home as bait to lure in ships. So the players are sent in to go clear it out. I love the ironic twist of turning a lighthouse from a light that guides ships to safety to one that guides them to their doom. I also adore that the lighthouse is visible from a lot of places around Noscea. This sets it up as a cool, I want to go there location, drawing players in to explore it, ironically much like it does with the sailors in its story background. The interior is also pretty cool to look at. It's clearly some kind of weird fantasy lighthouse full of strange contraptions and magitech. However, there's also corrupted crystals jutting out of random places at odd angles, giving it a disordered, abandoned feeling. Mixing the alien order with the chaotic clutter makes for an incredibly unique look, easily the best looking dungeon we'll see for a long time. The initial trash area sees the players invading the lighthouse from an underground waterway. Pretty cool, but the trash is pretty unremarkable. Just keep in mind that the corpses you see along the ground with corrupted crystals jutting out of them are adds that take a second to become targetable after they stand up, so don't spam your AoEs until you can actually damage them. The bosses are where things go from good to what the fuck were they thinking? I initially had a much briefer segment here, but I think this boss needs more explanation. The main gimmick of this fight is whenever you get hit by an ability from the boss, you get a stack of a debuff called Corrupting Crystal. When you get 3 stacks, you'll drop an AoE at your feet, which also applies a stack of Corrupting Crystal. This AoE is not small and deals a decent amount of damage as well as priming you for another explosion. Given that there's 4 people in the party and you all tend to take damage at roughly the same time, this can easily result in a feedback loop that kills the entire party if you're grouped together. Coincidentally, the boss drops some absolutely gargantuan AoEs on the ground during this fight, which forces you to stack close together. Sort of. The big AoEs always drop in a pair, 2 on either end of the room. These will drop a persistent puddle of corrupted energy, which will expand over time. This results in 2 safe spots being made at either end of the room. The proper way to dodge this is to have 2 ranged, your healer and ranged DPS, and your 2 melee, your tank and your melee DPS, go to each free spot. This way you can't get into a feedback loop if your crystals explode, and everyone can keep dealing damage to the boss. Oh, but that's not all to worry about. See, the boss also spawns Hound adds, which will apply stacks of Corrupting Crystal to those they hit. So the DPS have to constantly be killing the adds or the group will get overwhelmed. Even if they stay on top of things, at roughly 15% HP, the boss will spawn a bunch of adds, which require you to burn them down quickly or things will spiral out of control. So in summary, this fight requires you to have a plan to split your party, a task which is nearly impossible to do in random pickup groups. You also have to expect the DPS to keep adds under control, something new players are actively encouraged not to do true in early dungeons because of most bosses dying before their mechanic goes off, and you also have to dodge absurdly big AoE puddles. Any one of these things would have been in line with the difficulty curve present in ARR up until this point, but having all three happen at once is an absurd jump in difficulty. While I am glad that there's a boss which requires you to do these mechanics, this boss is way too punishing for the content level it's at. Wipes here are often unclear or vague as to how they actually happen, since your party will all be standing in a corner and then suddenly there's 6 AoEs under your feet and everyone explodes. If there was a theoretical Savage tier dungeon that was still in the Duty Finder, this is a fight I'd expect to be there. But it's not Savage.
It's something that you can run immediately after finishing Praetorium.
And given how much of a snooze fest that's become over the years, it's absurd to expect groups to just jump from that to this absurd level of difficulty. Moving on, the second trash area involves a lot of exploding crystals, so make sure you time your movements carefully and don't fight the enemies in an explosion zone or your healer will come at you with a knife instead of a staff or book or Yu-Gi-Oh deck. The second boss isn't much better than the first. I've watched a handful of videos and read a guide on this fight, and it's frankly baffling how any of it was supposed to be intuitive.
So, the fight takes place in a circular room with eggs lining the walls.
The boss, a giant fuck-off bird, hangs around the middle until it decides to tether to 3 eggs. You only kill one of those, and if one of those eggs is spotted, you kill that one. If you kill any more than that one egg, the boss belly flops onto a party member and deals a potentially deadly amount of damage. If you don't kill any of the bird's unborn children, the boss gets pissed, which makes sense, apparently, and deals a ton of room-wide damage. The strategy that I see employed these days is fuck this fight and pray that your healer is geared enough to heal through all the boss's bullshit. It's a gamble, but pretty much no one does this fight correctly anymore and instead just relies on brute force, which isn't exactly a sign of quality boss design. The third trash area features corrupted aether gas floating down a staircase. Make sure to shut off the valves at the top and bottom of the stairs so you don't get wafting clouds of rank-ass fart gas interfering with the boss in the next area. The final trash area involves fighting another big bird ad. It doesn't have that much health, so it should go down in just a few... What? What do you mean it's a boss? Look at it, it's basically already dead and we haven't even been talking about it for very long. There's no way this is an actual boss. Wait, really? That's the purple boss arena line? And a barrier? Fuck it, alright, we'll call it a boss. The third boss is where the sports car swaps to the toddler mobile in the opening simile. Where the other two bosses had overly punishing, unintuitive mechanics, this one has none! In fact, this boss doesn't even seem to have any health. In the amount of time that I've been talking about this fight, it's already been killed. I think some intern must have slipped and hit a wrong number on his health total or something, and no one cared enough to correct it because of the absolute mountain of other shit that was getting added in this patch. So this boss is essentially a pebble in the path of the previously mentioned high-powered sports vehicle. It's past you before you even realize it's there. Alright, so I'm actually going back and rewriting this section, as during the run that you're seeing on screen, I realized a few more things about the Siren, which made me realize that my casually dismissive former draft was unfair. This is probably the best boss we'll be seeing in F tier, and I feel that she deserves some nice treatment because of that. Alright, the main gimmick here is a special debuff that she'll throw on people called Siren Song. When Siren Song expires, it will hypnotize whoever it was on and cause them to attack the rest of the party. You obviously don't want this happening, so you need to get the debuff off your friend before it expires. It can't be Asuned, but it can be removed if you heal the target to full health. This means that this fight, as well as the rest of the dungeon really, is massively dependent on having a good healer. This sounds like it's fairly straightforward, just keep the party topped off, easy peasy, but it's not that simple. This entire fight is designed to complicate the process of keeping your party healthy. First off, Siren throws around 2 additional debuffs. A bleed damage over time debuff, meaning that your party members will constantly be losing health, making it harder to top them off, and a healing down debuff, which reduces the amount of healing your target receives from spells. These 2 can and should be Asuned, but that's not all. The boss also spawns 2 kinds of ads, standing and crawling zombie pirates. The standing pirates are your normal ads, tank them and burn them down as usual, but the crawling ones are dangerous. They spawn at the edges of the room and crawl towards a specific person, often the healer. When they get to that person, they latch onto them and prevent them from using any action. This requires someone else to come along and kill the ad before the trap player can do anything. Additionally, because this fight doesn't already have enough going on, she has room-wide damaging abilities that can be interrupted by anyone with a stun, and a special move where she'll disappear from the map, only to appear either in the center or at one of the sides. If she's in the center, she'll AoE the entire room except the area right underneath her, so get cozy beneath that booty. If she's at the edge of the room, she'll charge through the middle and do a decent amount of damage to anyone anyone that gets hit. An easy way to dodge this is to stack up in the middle when she vanishes, then either stay there if she pops up in the middle, or run to the sides if she's at an edge. Overall, I actually really like this boss fight. It's tense and dangerous, but its mechanics aren't obnoxiously obscure or overly punishing. Out of all the F-tier dungeons, Siren is probably the best example of what the 14 dev team can do when their design is on point.
In fact, she probably beats out a good chunk of D-tier bosses as well.
However, a single solitary solid boss fight doesn't let this dungeon escape from F-tier. The reason Pharos Sirius is here and near the top of the bottom tier is because aside from the final boss, all the gameplay feels shoddily made. God help you if you're running this with blind newbies. If even one player in the party isn't extremely overgeared for the content, then you're gonna have to actually figure out the mechanics of the fights, which can be an absolute pain unless you've, I don't know, seen a video by a strange gremlin YouTuber man explaining them all to you. God help you if you've got a rando who doesn't listen to chat, because you're gonna be stuck here for a long time. Even with the final boss in consideration, in the grand scheme of 14 bosses, she's only what I'd consider to be pretty good. If I were to individually rate her, I'd say she's about the level that I'd expect to see in C tier alongside two other similarly complex bosses, but here she stands out as a beacon to the potential of 14 as a game.
Unfortunately, that beacon is hidden behind the obscuring veil of the rest of this dungeon.
Pharos Sirius, much like Wanderer's Palace, is old. But not old and ineffectual, old and annoying. The kind of old that doesn't just roll over and die, but sticks around and festers to the point that you need an arm amputated. Pharos Sirius has more than earned its place here because I just don't have any more arms to lose after playing this game for so long. Thanks for watching. Come join me next time as we continue our descent into the depths of 14's worst dungeons. We're still a long way from the bottom, so I hope you enjoy my suffering enough to consider liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends. Alright, chilling out of the way, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one, and remember to always forge ahead.